Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hi, X. I used 4chan frequently many years ago and basically would hang out exclusively on the random page. I knew about the other boards here, obviously, but just never really took the time to explore them. I drive constantly for work and listen to numerous podcasts, audiobooks, and YouTubers whilst working the many hours I do. I have always loved horror, paranormal, and UFO and alien subjects since childhood, primarily ever since I witnessed a mass UFO sighting as a kid. I don't want to get into the sighting right now, as that's not why I am here. I've recently started listening to a handful of YouTubers that delve into dark internet stories that unfold on various sites, but for the most part on either 4chan or Reddit. I've never really posted on 4chan or Reddit, but I've lurked for a long time, mostly just as filler for times I'm bored. I have traveled over much of the US and had a lot of weird experiences all over, and I have only ever really shared some of these experiences with close lifelong friends I've had, to which they've pretty much smiled and nodded along, but I could talk deep down, they probably thought I was full of it. It's never really occurred to me to share here until today, after listening to a story of a young man who was able to share his story with repressed memories to this board, and while there wasn't much conclusion, he seemed to have found acceptance or suspended disbelief enough to find some answers for himself. So here I am. I haven't drank alcohol in years, and I haven't smoked marijuana for almost a year now. I say this because in order to work up the courage for this post, I picked up a nice bottle of whiskey, and I'm almost halfway through it and trying to proceed coherently. In 2012, I worked Roadside Assistance, changing tires, getting into cars with keys locked inside, delivering gas to people who were stranded, jump-starting vehicles, etc. I live in a desert state that borders Mexico, and while on call one night, this tale unfolded. I worked overnights basically 7 days a week, and was the only driver for my company that was dedicated to night shift. I was basically on call for multiple cities, and the only time another driver would be called in at night is if I called out, or was so overwhelmed with a busy night that the wait times were too excessive for the insurance companies that contracted us. One night I received a call for a customer who ran out of gas, and multiple other companies denied the call prior to mine receiving it. And when my dispatcher sent it over, she basically told me that it was extremely far out of our way, and we were only accepting the call because it was so incredibly dead that night in terms of work that was coming in. If I remember right, I had maybe 1 or 2 calls at the start of my shift around 7 p.m., and none others until this point, which was around 3 in the morning. I was actually at home because it was so slow, playing a game on my PC at the time, practically expecting work to be silent for the remainder of the night. I stopped at a gas station on the way, filled up 2 2-gallon gas jugs, and continued to the location. Now, most calls we received were associated with a specific address, business location, or nearest off-ramp mile marker to the customer in order to locate them. This request was simply coordinated. As it was pretty far into the desert away from the cities, I predominantly drove around night to night. So as I made my way to the location provided, I called the customer on their cell phone to get more details on how to reach them, because after a certain point, my GPS no longer had any roads to mark, and their coordinates appeared as a pin in the middle of nowhere, miles from any stretch of road the GPS could identify. Keep in mind at this time, smartphones were pretty lackluster in comparison to how good they are now, but I was using an Android with Google Maps, if you're wondering. The customer answered, and the call was very distorted due to poor reception. I spoke with the customer for several minutes. The majority of the length of the call was me asking them to repeat what they were saying again and again, as the distortion was awful. After diligently taking notes on my notepad, I worked out with them essentially what dirt roads to take and what landmarks to keep an eye out for, and I set on my way to locate them. Along the way to their location, my service had essentially cut out entirely, but I had their instructions, and I could still reference the map on my phone and try to figure out where I was relative to where I was headed. I believed I was extremely lost as I pressed on, and landmarks were practically impossible to look out for, as the darkness in the desert here was only illuminated by the moon and my headlights, which quite frankly polluted any distant illumination the moon may have provided. But finally, after a lengthy drive out to the area they were stranded at, and way too long searching for them up and down dirt roads, I saw hazard lights nearby and finally reached the customer. I admit by this point, I was honestly pretty pissed off I had been ripped away from my paid night at home gaming to get lost in the desert. But I put on my best customer service act and smiled as I got out of my truck and approached the vehicle, with my trusty maglite in hand. The driver's door opened as I approached, and an extremely distraught woman with puffy eyes and snot from sobbing over her situation got out of the car. She practically ran towards me, and I half expected her to wrap her arms around me as she and I reached each other, and she hunched over and gripped her knees to let out some more tears. I suppose out of joy that she was no longer alone, and the predicament she found herself in was now coming to a close. She was probably late 30s to early 40s in age, had a very corporate look to her. She was dressed in long skirt that hugged her legs and button-up shirt, short heels, and was covered in dirt from the area. And she explained as I walked back to my truck to get one of the gas cans that she had to walk quite a ways to a nearby rocky hill riddled with cacti and dead brush to get enough reception to even call her insurance long enough to get help sent her way. Apparently she'd been there since shortly after midnight, and again it was around 3 a.m. I'd left my house to set out to her. Anyway, I began filling her car with gas, and it was good I had brought a filled second gas container because I doubt the 2 gallons from just one of them would have been enough to get her to the nearest gas station. At this point it was probably about 4:30-ish a.m., and the early stages of dark blue began to fill the sky as daylight approached. We of course had small talk as I filled her gas tank, and obviously I was curious why in the hell she was out here at all. She proceeded to tell me that she works in the area and normally leaves during daylight hours. But work dragged on that day, and as she left work in the darkness of night, she apparently realized right away that she'd made the mistake of not filling her tank earlier that day, and thus, here we are. Thing is, though, there was nothing in the area I was aware of, and this chick looked like she was dressed to work in an office, likely in a position of management or something. As I probed for answers as politely as I could, she kept giving me vague answers as to what she did for work and why she was out there. She did, however, make some comments that stuck with me at the time. She begged me to make sure as we drove from the area that I stay close so she can follow my truck in her car back to civilization, and she said flat out that it wasn't safe to venture off the dirt roads or make a wrong turn. I reassured her and got in my truck to leave. So, away we went. I was driving my work truck and doing my very best to backtrack the route I took to find her, and she tailed along behind me in her car. We'd been driving for maybe 10 minutes or so through winding desert trails that looked more appropriate for quads or dirt bikes than anything, when she began frantically honking and turned on her brights in my rear view. The sky was a bit lighter now, but still a dark blue overhead. But off in the distance, as the sun approached the horizon, the sky got lighter and lighter. But headlights were still helpful, albeit not 100% required at this point. Anyway, I looked in my rear view, and instead of just seeing her headlights and car, I saw the silhouette of something. Something in the bed of my pickup, and its dark form was surrounded by the brights of her headlights, and she was honking over and over. The shape in the bed of my truck completely took me off guard, and I not only slammed on my brakes, but I was about to lose it as it was completely out of place considering where we were, etc. As I hit the brakes, this humanoid shape braced itself against the roof of my truck cab, and in this instant I saw long arms reach out abruptly to catch itself that just weren't human. With her brights at the rear, my truck skidding to a halt in the loose dirt, and the thud of its hands bracing for the stop on the roof of my truck. I saw this long-armed, long-legged humanoid effortlessly roll over the top of my truck cab as I came to a complete stop, and watched her car skid to a halt as well as she nearly rear-ended me. Not a sound was made as this thing went over the roof of my truck. No metallic groan as it collided with the hood of my truck. In fact, it seemed to simply glide over the windshield and hood and land on the ground before my vehicle, and as quickly as its long legs caught itself on the ground, it almost instantly ducked beneath the view from my windshield in front of the grill of my truck. My heart was beating out of my chest, and my first instinct was to gun the vehicle and run over whatever it was that just landed in front of the truck. But I hesitated, And in just mere seconds of all of this, the somewhat timid-looking, nerdy corporate gal in the vehicle behind me flung open driver's side door and pointed a handgun forward and quickly raced towards the back of my truck. She ducked briefly to look underneath it and popped back up as I opened my own driver's side door to join her. Honestly, I was in disbelief over what I saw and trying to rationalize it in my mind over the few seconds that passed. And just as soon as I began to open my door, she barked at me with a completely different demeanor than earlier to stay in the truck, and she circled my vehicle with her gun, both with an air of urgency, but at the same time as though this was not something she was unfamiliar with. She grabbed my passenger door handle and pulled, but the door was locked. I leaned over and popped the lock on the passenger door as they were just manual locks, and I didn't have a button to control them. When I did, she popped the door open, and I kid you not, she slapped a rosary on the seat and then slapped the door closed again, and circled around the back of my truck to the driver's side once more, all while peeking under the vehicle as she did so. My driver's side window was down, and she told me to put the rosary around my neck, and I looked at her like perhaps she was crazy at that moment, because quite frankly, I am an atheist. Or at least I was. She snapped at me as I gave her a bewildered look and told me again to put it on. I grabbed it and did so. And honestly, at that moment, I wondered to myself if I was on some stupid prank show for the Sci-Fi Channel or something. I put the rosary around my neck and felt both ridiculous and confused at the same time, watching her as if now she was the one at this point rescuing me. After she seemed satisfied that whatever we'd just encountered was gone, she told me we needed to get moving again and that the sun's almost up. It's likely not coming back. She stated this confidently and told me to keep the rosary on until we reached the main road about 20 or so minutes away. She returned to her car, followed me in my work truck back to the main road, and as we approached it, her vehicle's grille lit up red and blue like that of an unmarked police vehicle, and I pulled over. She approached my truck, asked for the rosary back, and she gave me a wad of cash, all hundreds. She told me not to come back to the area again, and said that I should invite God into my life. I asked her if this was a joke, and for an explanation. She simply told me that, without the full armor of God, it may seek me beyond its territory. When I asked her what it was, she told me to simply go home and count your blessings. After this encounter, I started to drive back home, stopped at an IHOP and drank several cups of coffee while trying to convince myself I'm not crazy, and furthermore Googling over and over descriptions to the best of my ability what I had witnessed to little avail. Several days later, I tried to call her again, as I had her number still sitting in my phone history. And of course, all I got from it was an automated voice on the other end, telling me the number was not in service. I fantasized about going back to the area. I've told a few of my close friends about this situation, and unsurprisingly, they acted polite about it, but still only made me feel like they thought I was messing with them, or possibly batshit insane if I actually believed it. I've never really brought it up again since then, other than to tell my ex-wife about it while we were still married, and she acted about the same.
Interesting story, OP. Do you still have the coordinates, or are you able to roughly pinpoint the location for some other brave anon to explore?
As this was years ago now, I definitely don't have the coordinates that were passed along by my dispatcher at the time, but I know the surrounding area somewhat. I'd be happy to try to pinpoint them as closely as possible. From memory and referencing Google Maps, these coordinates seem close to the location.
I would constantly wear a rosary if I experienced this. I've only seen UFOs and spheres of light. Tell us the UFO story, OP.
I have since began carrying a rosary for quite a long time after that. One my grandmother carried for pretty much her entire life that I have memory of. However, I haven't carried it with me as regularly in recent years. It primarily sits in a drawer next to my bed, and I will take it out when I'm essentially stressed out or something like that. I'm in Arizona, and the mass sighting I'm referring to is probably one many of you are well aware of, the Phoenix Lights. I brought it up mostly to convey its impact on me and my desire to investigate the unknown as a hobby. I will say I've watched pretty much every video and documentary about the Phoenix Lights, and honestly, I've always been bothered by how much they get wrong, at least from my perspective. Thing is, the vast majority of people sharing their stories about the Phoenix Lights were pretty far away. For me and my family, this craft flew slowly across part of the valley here, and my home was directly in its path. We not only watched the lights on the front of it approach, but we watched it pass overhead as well. I've heard multiple sources from documentaries, and even that pretty quirky TV show Ancient Aliens describe it as a V shape. This is absolutely 100% wrong. It was not empty space in the center of the triangle shape creating a V. It was, at least from its underbelly, a fully formed triangle. The sky as it approached and passed over my neighborhood and home wasn't quite pitch black yet. It was still in that very dark blue stage after the sun is set, but a small remnant of its light is still giving it that super dark navy blue hue. The craft itself was darker than the sky at the time it passed over us. It appeared black, but I feel like while it was dark, it may not have been actually full-on black. Its outline took up a huge portion of the sky, maybe 2 or 3 football fields in size. Stars in the sky vanished behind it as it moved. The lights on the front of the craft that it's so well known for looked very reminiscent of when you shine a flashlight directly into your hand, or something to that effect. Amber, reddish, and what's always stuck with me here. The lights almost looked like veins encompassed their internal structure. Now, when I say this wasn't a V shape, even though it was almost pitch black from my perspective, the center of the supposed V, which would be open space, was blocking out visibility of the stars just like the rest of the craft. Something I've never ever heard anyone else say is one thing that's legitimately haunted me for some reason ever since the sighting. You know when you point a camera at a monitor, and the camera sees like a row of lines, distortion that seemed to flow down it in waves? Well, once it was essentially directly above my neighborhood. That's what I saw within the boundaries of its silhouette against the sky. Didn't see that as it approached at all, though. Only when it was directly above. Kind of like a mirage on asphalt during a hot summer day, I guess. There was no sound. In fact, the lack of sound in everything around us was borderline upsetting. It was as if every living thing in the area had gone completely silent. The outer rim of the triangle shape was partially visible with my dad's binoculars, not like paneling or markings.
There are people here who can remote view the area and the demon. I would have done it, but my hands, or third eye or whatever, are full with other stuff. Show the model and color of the truck you were driving. Most people here need a reference point.
The truck was a 1987 Toyota 4x4, 5-speed manual. Looked very close to this truck. It was sort of an off-white cream color. Both doors on either side had the letters ERS with a lug wrench logo, like an X that stuck out behind the ERS. The black accent lines on the truck in the picture were a faded red on my work truck. But this picture is the closest I could find online that looks almost identical to it otherwise. The figure, or demon as you refer to it, seemed almost weightless in the bed of the truck. I couldn't make out many distinguishing features other than where the headlights of the car behind mine hit its back, and its silhouetted outline seemed to be moving and shifting like the fuzz of TV static. I couldn't really see its eyes, but I could more or less tell they were there, if that makes sense. And its gaze was burning with hatred, almost like I could literally feel it looking at me, or in me in a way. It had a large mouth that wasn't visible until it landed in front of my truck, and for only a split second. But the moment itself felt like an eternity. The mouth took up almost the entirety of the lower half of its face. It was wide, and the sides of its face seemed to indent where the edges of its impossibly wide smile stretched to. Most of its body and features almost appeared to absorb the light being shown on it, but the inside of its mouth seemed to go on forever, like the inside was an endless tunnel lined by rows of jagged hook-like teeth. Its legs and arms were probably double the length of a human's, if not slightly more. It hunched over, and its bent knees came up to where I suppose its chest would have been. Most of this thing's skin, or body, seemed to absorb light almost like that of paint Vanta black. And when I looked at it in the rear view, it was like instantly I was moving through molasses. The way it moved was fast, but to this day reminds me of almost like a stop-motion / claymation video where frames of its movements were simply cut out. I do have an update for you all here on /x/ that I began to type a reply about last night but was too distracted to finish, and my phone deleted what I'd typed up by the time I fell back asleep and awoke again this morning. I don't have any pets. My girlfriend of 6 years and I share an apartment. We have a 2-year-old son together, and she's currently 8.5 months pregnant with our first daughter. Her pregnancy has been rough, and she's hormonal. To give her space in bed at night, I have recently started sleeping in my son's room on his twin bed. He alternates sleeping in bed with her or me right now, and last night he was in bed with his mom in the master bedroom. Sometimes he will wake up in the night and sleepily stumbled into his room to come snuggle with me, dragging his favorite blankie behind him, and in his clumsy, tired state will oftentimes knock things over or make whatever noise as he comes that will awake me. That being said, last night I heard soft footsteps in the living room, which indicated to me that my son woke up and was navigating the darkness to make his semi-regular half-asleep trek through the house to come snuggle with me and go back to sleep. Upon hearing this, I sat up on the bed in his room and called his name and said, "I'm in here, buddy," to give him some guidance through his tiredness to reach me. The footsteps abruptly stopped, and I heard a stack of books on our coffee table fall and thud on the tile. This wasn't totally out of place, as we have this little routine occurrence in the middle of the night a few times a week. But last night, after maybe 30 seconds or so, I heard no more footsteps or movement. I got up and turned on my phone's flashlight and went into the living room. Front door locked, books scattered on the floor, and my son was nowhere to be seen. I checked the kitchen nearby. Nothing. The bathroom where he likes to grab his bath toys from sometimes. Nothing. Then I rounded the corner to the master bedroom and the door was closed. My son can't open doors yet. He tries, and he's done so a couple times, but it's usually a loud fumbling with the door handle for a while prior to it opening that occurs. I opened the master bedroom door. He was sound asleep with his mom spooning him in bed and her arm laying over him. She's hugely pregnant right now, and she doesn't make a silent movement ever at this point, and would have been much louder than the small steps I heard. I picked the books up in the living room and stacked them on the coffee table again, then proceeded to return to my son's room and lay on the little bed there and assume I was mistaken somehow. I closed my eyes and did my best to drift back to sleep, and I was almost there when I heard the books in the living room fall down again. I have no pets. I'm sure you were going to ask. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room. The books I had just restacked on the coffee table that I had most certainly heard fall again were on the floor once more. However, they were still stacked the way I had placed them. I honestly thought maybe I stacked them and left them on the floor instead of putting them back on the table, but I don't really think that's the truth of it. I put them on the table. I stood there in my dark living room looking at the stack of books, and I started searching around the entire house for an intruder. I turned all the lights on, checked all the windows. We don't have a back door, but I checked everywhere. I'm not crazy. I laid back down eventually as I found nothing, and I laid in the bed of my son's room staring at the ceiling. I opened this thread with an intent to reply. It was around 3:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, and I started hearing those same small footsteps again, coming towards the doorway of my son's room. After all this, I admit I was on high alert, and my adrenaline was going. I knew the master bedroom where my son was definitely closed, and I stared at the doorway in the darkness, listening intently to the footsteps I was hearing, and jumped back out of bed and ran into the hall. This time I heard the footsteps again, but it was like audio being played in my head. My place isn't huge. I saw no source of the footsteps I could hear, and honestly, they sounded identical to the noise my son makes at night when he's half awake stumbling to the other room. But I kept hearing it. I stood there in silence, taking steps here and there to try and pinpoint the source or direction it was coming from, and I was getting nowhere. I was starting to feel insane. These are the books on my coffee table for reference, if you're curious, but I'm assuming the actual books here don't matter at all. At this point, I was genuinely spooked, and I was feeling like I must be just being paranoid. As a heads up for you guys, since I posted this thread initially, I finished the bottle of whiskey I picked up the night of the original post, and haven't drank again since. Moving on, I returned to my son's room once again, and upon doing so, I saw that the closet in my son's room was open. This is a closet we use primarily for storage of random stuff, mostly things that we have no spot for, as we used to live in a much bigger place and had to downsize considerably after, due to losing my job last year. This closet has no clothing in it. It's not used regularly, and is honestly never open. It's full of boxes, with holiday stuff, camping gear, bags of tarps, and cold weather gear we don't need after I spent a year for work in Alaska about 4 years ago, plus other miscellaneous stuff. a couple coolers, a vacuum, and a lockbox with some handguns. The closet is never open anymore. It's a sore sight that I'm reluctant to have to organize and clear out, and the fact this door was open sent absolute chills down my spine. There's just no reason for it. I flicked the switch by the doorway to turn on the overhead fan and light in the center of my son's room ceiling, and the light that cast from it into the closet illuminated much of the junk in there, except for a silhouette. The same one I saw the night that caused me to start this thread. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't crying, but tears were rolling down my cheeks almost instantly. I was staring into the closet at it, and I could feel goosebumps spread across my body. I felt like any second a hand would stretch out and grab a hold of me from across the room, but it just stood there. I began to rationalize in my mind and in my head, told myself how reanalyzing this memory with /x/ is affecting my imagination. The shadow in the closet is playing visual tricks on me. But why was this closet open? At this point, I thought about the rosary in the drawer of my nightstand. It was in the master bedroom, behind a closed door, only a few feet away from my girlfriend and our 2-year-old son snuggling in bed. I convinced myself that I needed to go get it, and before I actually turned away or took my eyes off the closet, the silhouette within it moved. It backed up. It went deeper into the closet. But there's no space in this closet to do so. Nope, screw this. I strode a few steps toward the closet and slammed the door shut. I busted into the master bedroom and flung the door open. I scared my girlfriend awake and pulled open the drawer to my nightstand. The rosary was gone. It's gone. Not only is this rosary a family heirloom, it's basically the only religious item in my household. That woman I delivered gas to years ago seemed confident with her firearm. Like the rosary she had lent me that night was only in part what she needed against whatever this was. But I'm telling you, whatever this thing is. She seemed like she was confident if you shoot it, it's gonna feel it at the very least. I thought about my guns. They're in the closet, in a lockbox, high up on a shelf beyond a wall of boxes and crap, and not readily accessible, which at this moment I was regretting. My girlfriend asked me what I was doing and looked pissed off. I woke her up. I told her I was just checking on her and our son because I heard a noise in the living room. She said they're fine. She said back down, and I asked her where my rosary was. She seemed annoyed as hell and told me she had no idea. Now, nothing interesting really happened the remainder of the night. I've since cleared out the closet, and I've spent hours organizing the things in there. I've looked everywhere, and I can't find my grandma's rosary. I've looked everywhere.
Will you do something about it? I think you should. Hope you're gonna be okay and about your job, too.
Told my girlfriend we're overdue for spring cleaning, and all day I've been clearing out the closet. I witnessed a dark figure last night, and I've been looking throughout the entire apartment trying to find the rosary that belonged to my grandmother. It had beads of silver with a silver cross. The rosary that had been passed to me the night of the original incident in the desert was wooden beads and a wooden cross. I've considered throughout the day ordering a new rosary or something for protection, but it just felt like the one my grandmother wore for so many years provided a genuine layer of protection that I can't explain beyond my sentimental attachment to it. I'm assuming silver isn't necessarily effective protection against whatever this was, as the rosary I mentioned before was wooden. Do you guys think it was the cross itself that was protective? If I order a new rosary, I don't want it to be ineffective because it's some bull from Amazon or whatever. I'm still actively tearing my place apart under the guise of a late spring cleaning, and in lieu of this far not finding my grandma's rosary, I'm getting increasingly stressed out as sundown approaches. The woman I delivered gas to implied it wasn't an issue after the sun came up. Nothing about this thing gave me cliché vampire vibes, so I don't know what that was about, especially with the rosary she initially had me hold on to. Are there any anons who have experienced anything like this? Even if you haven't, have you heard of anything like this in your life? I'm looking for anything that can act as a ward to push whatever this is away. If I'm able to engage this thing with gunfire, I don't even know if I would. This isn't a movie. It's my life. There's no shooting a monster, and everyone lives happily ever after. If I discharge a firearm in my home or around it and this thing disappears, I could end up in jail or prison. Considering I'm on probation, prison is more likely in my case. Because I've primarily worked as armed security in more recent years, I was able to file for approval to carry and possess a firearm because my crime was plead down to disorderly conduct. Long story short, while working at a gentleman's club a little over a year and a half ago, a customer I was ejecting from the club threatened to shoot me, and without any evidence of a firearm or physical aggression from him, I just grabbed him by the throat and proceeded to slam him on his head after forcing him into the air by his neck. He tried to sue the club and it got thrown out. I was in jail for assault charges for quite a while and opted to fight the charges for a while, and just prior to going to court after a few months in jail, the state prosecutor offered me a plea to get out immediately, do 4 years of probation and anger management with only a charge of disorderly conduct misdemeanor instead of a felony assault. But regardless, I can legally possess my firearms, but there is zero room for error in using them, especially against something that could quite frankly be construed as a part of my imagination. Seriously, does anyone have any idea what I could be dealing with? I haven't had any odd occurrences since that original night until I've just begun sharing about it on /x/ is my attention to whatever this is causing it to come after me. Honestly, I have never felt like I have any reason to be considered crazy, while I am incredibly fascinated by paranormal, UFO, and other unexplained subjects. I firmly remain a skeptic throughout all of it. The actual meaning of a rosary is lost on me beyond its use by Catholics. If this thing is afraid of them, does that mean holy water or barriers of salt or burning of sage could help? Please, somebody give me something to work with here. It's almost 5 p.m. and sundown is on the way.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.